We spoke to the Eurogroup president, Pascal Donohoe, and he said that for now, the European Commission are saying that they're willing to tolerate higher levels of borrowing, higher levels of debt, but for a limited amount of time. The question is how long this tolerance is going to be accepted, and whether or not they can come to some consensus about what the reform of these fiscal rules could look like. So how do you see this discussion playing out in 2021? And can we get to a situation where governments will be allowed to structurally keep their deficits and their debt to GDP levels higher than before?
It's great to join you, and thanks for flagging this topic, because I do think the politics of fiscal policy reform are going to be a very big theme in Europe for this and probably for next year. At the moment, the Commission has invoked the general escape clause, which means the adjustment path to countries' deficit and debt levels has been suspended because of the coronavirus crisis. And there's a debate raging within the Commission about what happens next year. And there are some voices that think the clause should not be extended. That means member states need to start moving towards their medium-term fiscal path. And there are others that believe the clause should also apply next year. The bigger question, I think, is what's going to happen more broadly to the fiscal rules. Now, the 3% deficit threshold, the 60% debt to GDP threshold, that's written into the treaty. So there won't be any, I think, push to reform the treaty. But there are voices that believe the implementing legislation, you take that 3 and 60 and you implement it in practice, that should be reformed. And that's really where the debate is going to be. I think what will happen this year is a review of the fiscal rules. That'll be a process the Commission starts once all the bells and whistles around the Recovery Fund ratification have been concluded. I suspect that will conclude in the autumn at some point, and there'll be a set of proposals that emerge that will allow the Commission at that stage to effectively communicate interpretive changes to the rules. That's important because you don't want member states to be forced into a very onerous adjustment next year. So this new interpretation around the rules will give member states a bit more flexibility. And then really by the French, I think what they're going to do is take those changes and try and embed them into law. And that'll be a big debate for the first half of next year.
Of course, in 2022, the French do take over the presidency in Europe. But Mujtaba, I actually want to bring in our French reporter right now, Charlotte, to pick up on the French angle and the importance of the French angle for the direction of Europe as a whole from here. Charlotte.
Yes, I wanted to ask you, because I read your recent note on on Macron and how crucial 2021 is for his potential re-election for the presidential election in 2022. And you basically said that the election is for him to lose, basically, that the traditional parties, the center-left, center-right, haven't rebuilt themselves just yet, and that even the far-right leader, Marine Le Pen, according to polls, would not win in this two-round election in France. So what do you see as the greatest risk to his potential re-election this year? Is it the rollout of the vaccine that has been particularly slow to start with, or is it the economic and social fallout of the COVID crisis? What do you see is the most crucial for him to address this year in order to get re-elected in 2022?
I think it's all of the above, frankly. I think you've put your finger right on the pulse. I think Macron obviously has a difficult health crisis to manage, as many countries in continental Europe do, as they get through teething problems with the vaccine and new strains of the virus present themselves and restrictions are tightened. But there's obviously then the concomitant impact on the economy. And I think the big problem for Macron is a lot of the jobs, or all of the jobs, arguably, that he added to the economy in the first 2.5 years of his presidency now is being wiped out by COVID. And I think there's a very big concern about the unemployment rate rising again in the first half of this year, and that creating big headwinds for Macron as he heads into what will be a challenging electoral cycle. So there's a combination of health and economics. I think to some extent the security crises and some of the incidents we saw at the back end of last year are all converging to make this a very challenging year for Macron. And I think it's just worth very quickly contextualizing with the German election, because there's obviously lots of attention on that. this September. But the risks that flow from the German election are quite constrained. I think the leader will be a mainstream conservative, most probably Armin Laschet, if you look at the CDU race over the weekend. And the coalition will highly likely be a black-green government, which will be sensible domestically, sensible on fiscal policy, if anything positive, and also positive for Europe. The French race is a bit more of a wild card because there is again that risk that Macron will most likely be facing Le Pen in the second round runoff in May next year.